Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 164th Right and Left Discussion Forum and our first virtual telecast. But we all hope to be back in the studio before too long. And also, this is our first telecast since the retirement of John Madding after 30 years of outstanding service to the City of Wadsworth as manager of WCTV. Good luck in the future, John. We hold our televised discussions to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss civil unrest. Our country is now involved in a violent expression of demands for racial justice, acted out in large cities across the country. Racial unrest has been a part of the American scene since our founding. The current demands for equal justice, economic opportunity, and general equality as general equality of life as full citizens of the United States have been expressed by African Americans in one form or another since the end of World War II. Our panel today, beginning with Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. Next is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Next is Ronald Chamberlin, senior research chemist. And completing our panel is Joe Gaines, a member of the faculty of the University of Akron. Patty, do you think that our current racial unrest is a continuation of what we have experienced for the last several decades, or have we reached a new level of discontentment?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to recognize the fact that we are discussing racial unrest and we have a very white panel to do so. So it's a little difficult in some ways to discuss this. But from my feelings, I think that it is a continuation of difficulties that we've had and racism that has existed in this country. Unfortunately, what I have seen over the last 3.5 years is that it seems as though there tends to be a movement from administration to say that everything is okay, that racial or systematic racism does not exist, and that people are overreacting to situations within the country. And I really don't think that anything could be further from the truth. I feel that for many that are concerned with racism in this country and with the treatment of those people of color, that they have seen a harshness in their treatment, the disruption of their civil rights, the idea that there is no longer a need for improvement. All of this culminating with the deaths of Black members of our society in unfortunate situations that are tragic and abhorrent to most people. I don't know how we can address this at this point and the resulting riots, the resulting marches, unless we first address the racism that is at the core of it.
Patty, other than the fact that the police have been accused of a lot of racial violence, what do you think, other than that, what is the cause of racial unrest? Are there exhibitions of pure racism going on all around? I mean, are you and I involved in racial acts?
Perhaps not you and I, but there are those that are.
Tell me about what are they doing?
Well, first of all, just simply the deaths of some Blacks unnecessarily and incorrectly, and then being told that this does not require any type of criminal reaction to this, as far as a repercussion or as far as bringing justice to it. It involves simply stating that we should change the way that zoning is done so that low-income housing can no longer be placed into communities so as to achieve racial equality. The notion that we have to protect our suburbs from people that are of low income and possibly those of color from moving in. I think this is one of the things that Black Lives Matter is trying to push forward, that we need to stress the importance of the Black life, that it does matter.
Hey, Bryan, what do you think?
Well, I guess I'm not sure if we can color everything that's happened just from the matter of race. On the other side of some of these issues, it takes a while for justice to happen. And when some of these events occurred, it seemed to me that there was a real rush to judgment, that it was because of that person's color that they were treated poorly by the police or that they were shot by the police, and it always boils down to their color. But as more information comes out about that individual and about the situation, it really sheds a lot of light to the way we have, in our country, is due process. Just recently, the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky, just yesterday gave his summary of, what happened after an investigation for this young lady that was shot by the police. And it was vastly different than the narrative that was put forth by the folks in Black Lives Matter, by what the media ran with. And as those facts became known, it was obviously clear that it wasn't just a matter of what their color was, it was what they were involved in from a criminal aspect. So I really hesitate to jump on that bandwagon that everything that people of color experience is because of their color. And I think the data would support that. It's not just a matter of race. It's a matter of what you're doing, that the consequences of your behaviors. Now, there are some instances where the police did not act within their standard operating procedure. That is clear. No one wants to make any excuses for that, and we need to root out that kind of stuff. But we can't just sit back and say, oh, it's just a matter of your color that these things are happening to you. One of the commentators mentioned that because of his color, his father sat him down when he began to drive and gave him the talk about what happens if you get pulled over by a police officer. I had that same conversation with my dad when I started driving, and he explained to me that if I ever got pulled over by a policeman, I should listen and comply to whatever he says. And to be very careful, because if you're late at night, that officer might be working at night. He's not sure who he's walking up on. And this was back in the day when they didn't have computers in their cars or anything like that. So I got that same talk. So I can't square that with just if you're Black or white or Asian or Latino or Hispanic, however you want to cut it, that it's all about your race. I think it has to do with the behaviors that we're seeing. And I look at Black Lives Matter. I think it probably started out honorably, but it's been co-opted by some very, very bad actors. You never saw any riots happen when 14 people are killed in Chicago over the weekend, another 27 are wounded, a 3-year-old Black kid gets shot by a drive-by shooting. There's no riots There's no protesters in the street. There's no looting. You know, I find it a little disingenuous that they're not camped out in Chicago every weekend trying to stop this violence. And when you listen to some of the strong Black voices on the other side of this issue, they're saying that this isn't going to solve anything for anybody, that you can't pick and choose what issues you decide to riot over. They've talked about the breakdown of the family. I think we're seeing that right now in these communities. And these Black voices that come out that are considered conservative, they're sort of shuffled off the stage because that doesn't fit the narrative. So I really struggle with jumping on the bandwagon that everything that happens to you is because of your color, when in fact, you have to look at what went into and what were the preceding factors that you found yourself on the opposite end of a warrant, or the opposite end of a law of being taken in, or your behavior and all that kind of stuff. I just don't think that we're getting anywhere and forwarding the narrative that we need to do something in our country if we do have systemic racism. You know, a lot of times people talk about systemic racism and they point to different institutions. Well, those institutions are basically, you know, government institutions. And if we did have that systemic racism, we need to root that out. But I just have a hard time jumping on that bandwagon that everything that happens to a person of color is because of their color and not because of their behavior or the consequences that
Bryan, you mentioned Breonna Taylor, though. Number one, she was never charged with anything, nor does she have any felony record whatsoever. The actual warrant was for her ex-boyfriend, not because of him, not because of her present boyfriend that was in the home with her. No drugs were found in that apartment. She had done nothing wrong whatsoever. So to say that her death was due to the bad actions of her, I think is unfair. A lot of things could be questioned about at that incident, but it is not her fault, nor were there any actions that
she was probably in the wrong place at the wrong time, because it was not a no-knock warrant. They announced themselves. They have people there that announced themselves. Her boyfriend at the current time shot at the police officers. She wasn't in bed. She was not in bed. She was up in the hallway. And, you know, it's unfortunate that this happened, but her ex-boyfriend is clearly on record as saying that he was storing drugs and cash at her apartment. And the warrant reflected that. The warrant said, hey, we have to go find this guy.
There was no record of her having drugs at that location. Yeah. When you say she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, she was the middle of the night and she was in her own home.
I think Breonna Taylor that is a whole nother program. Meantime, I'd like to move on to Ron and see what Ron has to say about all this. Speak. Okay, Ron, while you figure out how to do that, let's go to Joe.
Here.
I'm here, if you want me now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bryan, you have some good points, particularly thinking about in terms of individual cases, whether black or white. I'm impressed unfavorably by looking at the Beacon Journal every morning about how many shootings and things are going on in Akron, Ohio. It's a relatively safe community. However, Black Lives Matter. They don't matter any more than other lives, but they don't matter any less. And in our country, for quite a long time, they have mattered quite a bit less. So you talk about systemic racism, and I think it's there. I'm thinking of myself in terms of, you say, I don't recall doing anything racist particularly, except maybe a couple of bad jokes a few years ago. I'm thinking, however, that I'm in a position where I don't have to worry about it. I can rent a house wherever I want to. I can rent an apartment wherever I want to. I can walk into a store without a court questioning whether I'm going to pull a gun out from under my hoodie. So that's.
No, I think you're exaggerating what's going on. I think what you just said, I would suggest that just about every black person could do the same thing.
Yeah, and whatever you mean by that exactly, but
Well, I mean that I think that the idea of racial discrimination has been grossly exaggerated by the race profiteers. There was a discussion between Denise D'Souza and Jesse Jackson, when Denise D'Souza asked Jesse Jackson, exactly what do you mean by racism? Give me an example. His response was, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. Well, I would suggest maybe just because you can't see it means it's not there. But anyway, that's my view.
yeah, well, I don't completely agree with that.
I know you wouldn't.
I'm looking at the whole concept of white privilege, and looking back over my life, I can understand that, and what I'm getting from them, listening to the voices of just ordinary people about this, in whatever sort of media that you see, people just, you talk about the talk, Bryan, and that's very true. We need some respect for the police department. There's bad apples in it. We need to root them out. I think places like Wadsworth, smaller towns, do a pretty good job of that. Cities maybe a little bit less so because they have a greater need for personnel. So all that sorts of things that kind of comes into it. And I don't know, John, you've asked the question, parroting the person who asked Jesse Jackson about it. What is race? What is racism? And I may be oversimplifying, but isn't it just a sort of a set of general prejudice about people who think about other folks in terms of a stereotype and fit each individual into that stereotype and judge them unfairly based on what they are and who they are rather than their accomplishments?
Well, that requires you to do an awful lot of guessing about what other people are thinking.
No, just talking about oneself, about oneself, and then you observe the consequences of that in other folks. Yeah,
Joe?
it's not easy, John. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that it's real.
But you see, you can't really give any concrete examples of what the realness is.
All I have is the testimony of folks who talk about that.
Yeah, I know.
Person,
Do you need to have concrete examples? I mean, the thing is, like, you might not be able to pinpoint one event. We can in many cases, but you don't have to. It's there. If you're around black people, you see it all the time. From their point of view.
Tell me about that. What do you see when you're around black people, Joe?
What do you mean?
Well, what you just said.
Well, what I see is basically that they have to act differently. That in many cases they have to, how they talk to their children, the talk. When I heard about the talk, I thought it was sex. First time I heard those terms used, but it wasn't. It was about driving and how to act towards the police. I've never had to have that. I mean, I probably did in some ways, but not as individualistic as say the African Americans have to. We look at slavery as something in the past. We forget that, it wasn't that long ago. And it, in many cases, still affects us today.
4 to 5 generations ago.
That's not long.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm serious. I don't think it's that long. When you think about it, 1860s, there was slavery.
That's
I was born in 1950, so I was not even 100 years after that.
Okay, I guess maybe it depends on your view of a long time. But,
well, my view of history is that slavery still affects us today in many cases. We don't even realize it. And when I say slavery, I'm referring more or less towards racism. Go ahead, somebody else wanted to say something.
No, let me ask you this, Joe. In the last 70 years, we have had numerous civil rights laws passed by the U.S. Congress, Voting Rights Act, a lot of different laws passed in a lot of different places. Why have things gotten worse?
Well, for one thing, to get those laws passed, look what we've had to do. We've had to protest, we've had to march. There's been
Absolutely.
violence, and not necessarily on the part of the people protesting, but it wasn't easy. And one thing too was that both Republican and Democrats worked to get those rights approved. Now it seems like maybe only one party will work towards that, and the other party doesn't.
Do you think that we need more new laws?
No.
Record.
And you said no.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay.
I said no.
Yeah, yes, you did. We don't need new laws. I have a big concern about the role that the organization of Black Lives Matter is playing in all of the death and destruction going on in our city streets. Black Lives Matter was founded on a false narrative to begin with, and it's morphed into a hate group. When you go onto their website, the founder said that she started the organization because of her outrage over the murderer of Trayvon Martin being acquitted. And first of all, that is the part that's false. He was not murdered. He was killed trying to kill somebody else. He was on top of George Zimmerman banging his head against concrete. And that's how he got shot in the first place. And a similar situation with Michael Brown. All the indication from 2 grand juries and an investigation by the Obama Justice Department said it was a justifiable shooting on the part of the cop. It was not a murder. The other thing that bothers me about this organization is the fact that they have come out against the idea, or against promoting the idea to Black youth that the way to avoid poverty is to graduate from school, get a job, and get married before you have children. The Brookings Institute did a study on that and showed that people who graduate from school, get a job, get married, their chances of moving into poverty are around 2%. About 98% will not be in poverty. This organization, while it has the name Black Lives Matter, ignores all Black lives except the ones that were killed by police. That's my little diatribe. Patty, that smile means you got something to say.
I think it's a little more detailed than that. And it's simply saying that, you know, graduate from high school and get a job, and that's going to clear everything up.
No, get
While
married.
those are good, and I think that's good advice for everyone, but I
Right.
don't think that that's solution to that. Also, when I have heard, matter of fact, I just listened to one of the founders of Black Lives Matter speak yesterday, and she was talking about things that the organization, yes, they want all Black lives to matter, but they want to start with, you know, dealing with homelessness, dealing with the drug problem, dealing with the fact that there are many mentally ill, dealing with prison reform. These are things that can be done to help those in our country of color that are dealing with problems within the community. I don't know that Black Lives Matter has been taken over, but for example, when we see the riots or the demonstrations, if it is a peaceful protest, and many of the Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful, have they been taken over by other organizations? Absolutely. Antifa has played a role in this. There are members from the right, the Boogaloo group, that has gone and is placed out on the internet for members of their association to show up at protests and disrupt the situation to cause the damage. Plus, you have just plain criminals who try to take advantage of the situation just so they can steal a pair of tennis shoes.
Okay, my question though, Patty, is why would Black Lives Matter object to the message to graduate from school, get a job, get married before you have children?
I
Why
don't
do
think they object to any of
They don't
those.
object.
yes, they
individually.
do. They demanded that billboards with that message be torn down in Milwaukee.
Because I think what they're saying is not that, they're not going to tell a Black young person, don't graduate from high school. They don't object to that. What they're saying is that that is not going to solve,
Right.
those things
It's
alone are not going to solve. this
American
thing.
lives matter.
And it
But
takes
don't you
a
think
lot
though
more
that
than that.
for a young Black guy who drops out of school, doesn't get a job, fathers innumerable children, don't you think the message should be out there to graduate from school, get a job, and get married before you have kids?
I
Well, that
think
should be
that
for
should be
everyone.
a message for everyone, not
Yes.
just for Black people.
Why would Black Lives Matter oppose that message on billboards
I
in
don't think
Milwaukee?
they do.
Yes, they
Yeah.
did. They went straight to the people who put up the billboards and demanded they be torn down, and they were.
Was it for that reason?
Yes. No, what they said was the message is without attribution. Well, that's not true. Brookings did a very thorough study on it and said that it is Joe, I think your instincts ought to be able to tell you that graduating from school and getting a job is a better way to
Oh,
avoid
certainly.
poverty. Well,
Booker T. Washington would have agreed with you too, but there's more to it than just that.
Well, I think you need to follow the money. I haven't seen anything when I do my search on Black Lives Matter. I haven't seen any programs in Chicago, St. Louis, Los Angeles, anything sponsored by Black Lives Matter. They were basically, quiet for several years after the Ferguson riots. We can't forget about Ferguson. That happened over 3.5 years ago, if we're trying to pin this on anybody. But there wasn't, all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars that they've taken in. Where is it? Where are they spending it? Let's see some of those programs that everybody talks about. Let's see some of these programs in inner city Chicago. Let's see some of the programs in inner city Philadelphia and St. Louis and Miami, and let's see some of that money go put to work. It's been pouring in for the last 2 or 3 years because they've set up this organization to supposedly help people. Why is it taking so long for that money to get to the end of the row? I can't. I just why can't they partner with the NAACP? Why can't they partner with other groups within these cities that are trying to do something? These are Black groups that are trying to do things. Why can't they partner, reach across the aisle and partner with some of these folks that are trying to do something in the communities? There doesn't seem to be anything that they're doing. And they if you're to believe the U-Haul that showed up yesterday with all of the signs and shields and all that kind of stuff to go along with a peaceful protest in Louisville, you kind of wonder where that money's coming from. And so I guess I'd like to see some money being spent from them. I mean, I'd like to see their budget. How much do they have? How much do they have on hand? I mean,
I saw the pictures of that U-Haul and it was interesting. Yes, they were passing out signs. I don't find that something to be egregious. And the signs did not look like they were expensive. Now, if they'd shown up with AK, guns and
Patty,
them out, that's a different story.
The narrative has been that these were all spontaneous, grassroots, people coming out in the streets. It's all spontaneous. These people just showed up. We don't know where the Molotov cocktails came from. We don't know where the bricks came from. We don't know where the shields came from. This is all spontaneous. I kind of wonder, how spontaneous is it when you already have a U-Haul parked and you're handing out signs for the spontaneous protest that's going to happen when the Attorney General of Kentucky, who was Black, came out with his report and a very thorough investigation, and you still had looting and rioting and in cities that it didn't even make any difference. I just find that a little disingenuous.
Two policemen were shot last night in Louisville.
Yes.
2 policemen are shot.
Yeah, I believe they
Let's not forget
arrested.
about the 2 policemen that were shot in the face in San Diego. or incompetent.
There have been many that have been ambushed, but I'm wondering what would happen in Louisville if somebody showed up with a truckload of Make America Great signs. The Trump's, well.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do believe that we're just about out of time here.
Thank God.
Thank you very much, folks. This was a
See
spirited
everybody.
discussion.
Really, we're the wrong people to talk about this.
Well, I think if white people